cameras and microphones off until called by the chairman to speak. However, would all members of the committee also switch their microphones off until called by the chairman to speak, as this will limit any feedback issues. Should you wish to speak during the meeting, would you please use the raise your hand function in Teams? However, again, if the raise your hand function does not work on your screen for any reason, please either indicate on screen your wish to speak or by using the chat facility. The chair requests that the chat facility is limited to use only if there are any connection issues or function failures, so that all comments that are needed to be made are made during the meeting, and they can be addressed during the meeting for the members of the public to be aware of what's being said. However, should any of you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact the Democratic Services Officer separately during the meeting. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for that, Karen. Okay, we now begin the agenda now. So the first item of the agenda is any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Crowley. I also note that Councillor John Thomas is not present, and if I get apologies after, I will add them to the minutes unless he joins during the meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next item. Are the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October, are you happy for me to sign them as a true record?
Yeah.
Yep, fine, good. We're now moving on to declarations of interest. Have we got any declarations of interest here? Nope, we haven't. Moving on to the agenda item 4, which is references. The first one, it's a draft Welsh language promotional strategy. Tom, are you delivering on this?
I am, thank you, Chair. And a colleague of mine, David Thomas, who we're working with on this item, has joined us as well, if that's
welcome, David.
So good evening, committee. This is a reference of the leader to your committee. Traditionally, I take equalities and Welsh language issues to the Learning and Culture Committee because it's within their terms of reference to oversee that. But one of the findings from the assessment that Di will talk about in a moment was the importance actually of seeing the council's Welsh language work reflected in a number of different pieces of work and strategies across the organisation. And actually, I think because of the importance of this piece of work, it felt appropriate to also refer it to this committee as well this evening. So a bit of background for the committee. The Welsh language standards that were introduced from 2011 place certain duties on public sector organisations, and standard 145 is the one that relates to the requirement for us to publish a 5-year promotion strategy, looking at how we're going to promote the use of the Welsh language across the Vale of Glamorgan. So at the moment, we're coming to the end of the 5th year of the current strategy. So we're required to undertake an assessment of the success or otherwise of that strategy. And we're also now drafting the next 5-year strategy. The reason for commissioning Di was to bring some independence and expertise into this piece of work, and I'd like to say thank you for the work that he's done to date for us. The work has been really good quality. So what Di has done, and we'll describe shortly, is to review the existing strategy, which has got a 5-year action plan against a series of different considerations around Welsh for adults, children, young people and their families, community activities, and also Welsh in the workplace. And Di will talk about the findings that he's concluded as a result of that assessment. And we've started to do some work now in drafting the next 5-year strategy, which we're currently consulting on, and we're bringing it to your committee this evening, Chair, and also to Learning and Culture in December as part of that consultation process. And that new draft strategy is framed around Welsh Government's policy Cymraeg 2050. So the 3 elements, and Di will talk about those shortly. So with your permission, Chair, I'll hand over to Di at this point.
Hello everyone, and thanks for the invitation to come along and talk to you this evening and present the draft strategies. as has been noted, the assessment and the strategy itself are statutory documents. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly discuss the strategy itself first and then go into the assessment. The strategy is really one that's a document that mainly to be so that the council's made aware of its Welsh language duties, not just in relation to things like this promotion strategy and the standards, but how that links to a wide range of other documents and policies and departments that the council has. Planning, it links in with the Welsh Education Strategic Plan. So in a sense, it's almost a checklist of where the Welsh language fits into the policy framework. So as such, it's a very high level document. The assessment was based on not only your current 5-year plan, which there's only been 4 reports on yet, because obviously you're in the 5th year, so the report on that hasn't been prepared yet. But also to review the actions that you've achieved with your partner organisations, in the Welsh Language Forum, in the Public Service Board, and just a general review of whether some of the targets and hopes that you put into the original plan had actually been achieved. As Tom mentioned, the new strategy is going to be based on the 3 themes of Cymraeg 2050, which is the Welsh Government's long-term strategy for the Welsh language. A number of other organisations are also modelling their new strategy on those 3 themes, so it made sense that the Vales would fit in with that, because then it makes comparison with your peers easier, and also it makes reporting into Welsh Government a lot easier as well. The 4 themes that were in your original document are shown in the assessment that's been drafted to date, but I actually began by including a partnership sort of assessment as well, just to see how well that had worked. One of the things that's been echoed across every local authority and every organisation that has a plan like this is that the aims of a strategy like this are too big for one organisation to achieve by itself. And that's one of the reasons why in the assessment I've referenced your own corporate plan, because that emphasises how much partnership working is so vital to achieving so many of the other policies you have, not just the Welsh language issues. One thing that I could see from the start was that the partnership working approach in the Vale has delivered on a number of the actions from the original strategy. And one thing I picked up on, and I think maybe this is where the relevance to this scrutiny committee in terms of performance is so important. The current strategy doesn't actually include some of the partners like Cardiff and Vale Health Board, for example, so it doesn't quite match the Public Service Board footprint. And of course, the Health Board itself has a number of Welsh language actions and strategies that it has to meet. And so there's possibly things that you're already doing that aren't quite being recorded in the right way. So, you know, you're possibly doing better than you realise in a number of fields because it's not actually quite as linked up as it could be. But that's a recommendation that I put in the assessment for you to take forward as part of the new strategy. So much of the promotion strategy also has to do with the Welsh Education Strategic Plan, which is also being drafted and consulted on, I believe, at the moment for the next 10 years. So some of the actions that may appear in the final 5-year strategy won't be unique. They'll simply mirror what's in the WESP, because there's no point in duplicating things or having different targets. They should be the same ones so that there's integration across those 2 policies. One of the things that the standard specifically asks for is to see whether a local authority has increased or at least maintained the number of Welsh speakers in the area. The assessment shows that the Vale has maintained the figures within 200 people, which, given the changes in population, that's pretty good going over 5 years. But possibly more significantly, in terms of the pupil level figures that are collected each year, the Vale has shown an 11.3% increase in the last 5 years. So that certainly shows that the work being done on the WESP and Welsh medium education is having an impact. The last theme in the assessment was around Welsh in the workplace. And again, that includes things like the Welsh classes being put on for staff. One of the things that I think is important to recognise with the themes that you've had in the previous scheme as well is that so many of them interlink. You have one on children and families, but that's difficult to separate from education issues, and that's difficult to separate from community issues. So there's a lot of cross-cutting going on. The Welsh in the Workplace one also, of course, has classes, Welsh classes for your staff that are also classed as Welsh for adults. So it comes under an education in that sense as well. So unpicking it's quite difficult. Hopefully the assessment document is clear and does explain a lot of this. I'm not going to go into too much detail tonight, otherwise we could be here for hours. And obviously you've got an agenda and I don't want to keep you too long. One of the things again that I noticed in going through some of the figure work is that a lot of information that comes via the improvement plan and into the annual Welsh language reports doesn't get recorded in the same way in the annual reports that are done on the 5-year strategy that you have. So there's a slightly different way of reporting, whereas it should really just be the same information that's in both reports. Again, that's another simple recommendation to take forward for the next version that's currently out for consultation. Really speaking, what I picked out mostly from the analysis that I've done to date, and the assessment itself is a draft document at the moment as well, it's not final. In a sense, I'd say you were underselling yourselves as a council in terms of how much you've actually done over the last 5 years. There's a lot of information there that's not being fully recorded and fully reported. Those are all things that are easy to do because the information is there, but hopefully some of the recommendations that get taken forward will mean that when things get reported now for the next strategy, it'll be a lot more detailed and robust and integrated across a number of different documents. One last document that's obviously missing from the current set is the action plan, and obviously that's possibly the key document in terms of all of this. You had a document that was an action plan under the old strategy, and what I've done so far is pulled that apart and put it back together as fitting under the 3 themes of Cymraeg 2050, but that's been held back for the time being because during the consultation period, the actions have to come from the Vale, from the council, from your partners, from the public, from the different departments. It's not for me to tell you what your actions should be. So that document's going to be very much developing over the period of the consultation. And as part of the work that I'm doing with Tom, I'm actually attending the Vale's Welsh Language Forum next Monday as part of the consultation. So I'll be speaking to a number of your partners to get what they feel are the important actions down on paper. The 3 documents are very much living documents. This is the very initial stages of the process. We've got 8 weeks, is it, of consultation, I believe. And then the final versions will be coming back to you in the new year for approval. So obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions you've got this evening, and any comments or suggestions you've got for the consultation, please send them through and we'll make sure they get included in the final documents when they come back to you. Excuse me. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. And obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Di. Only, I suppose, just to emphasise the stage that we're at, that you're just describing there, that these are the initial drafts now subject to that 8-week consultation process. And what we'd be proposing, Chair, is that we will evaluate the feedback from that consultation process, make any revisions to the assessment and the strategy, and also, as Di was describing, produce the action plan. And we would bring that back through your committee and also Learning and Culture in February, ahead of then going to Cabinet for this to be considered and approved before the end of March next year. I think you're on mute, Chair.
Muted, Mark.
I say thank you very much for your presentation, Di. And thank you for your introduction and conclusion, Tom. I'm just now going to go over to members for their comments now. Any member want to make a comment? Oh, I'll make some comments then. Okay, Councillor Ian Johnson.
I was just saying, Chair, if you want to go first, I was just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to speak, but obviously I could talk for hours. Okay, that's fine. I'll make a few points and a few observations. I just noticed just a little error, only a little error, but it's on Appendix B on the front page. It should say Welsh Language Promotional Strategy 22-27. All right, it says 2017-22, so don't worry about that. But there's an interesting insights here. I thought that's something that we could really get to grips with. And in what's very interesting, I represent a ward called Stanwell, which has had one of the highest amount of Welsh speakers, but also has quite a lot of deprivation as well. And that really is quite interesting because I know where the Welsh speakers are. I also know the people who don't speak much Welsh, and it does seem to be in the super output areas. And it'd be quite interesting to look at a table or data. I know we've got 2 maps, but it'd be quite interesting to look at a table or even a correlation table where we can look at the deprivation and Welsh speakers and see what sort of correlation we got. So I should imagine we get a negative correlation, I'm afraid, which the most deprived area is probably the less Welsh speaking areas in the Vale Glamorgan. I hope I'm wrong. But what I would like to do is have a kind of no correlation at all between them. And I think that would be a major challenge. But I think one of the keys to that, I feel, and I know we may have discussed this in education, lifelong learning, is early years education. Because actually, I think if you get people who come from monoglot backgrounds, mostly, of course, English-speaking backgrounds, if they're introduced to Welsh speaking at a nursery level, especially when they're acquiring language for the first time, rather than learning it in a secondary fashion, I think that's the key. I think, and also then we got to really then work on true bilingualism further on in education. And I know that will be a major challenge, but and also that needs to be enhanced by not just us, but also by the media as well. And I don't just mean the old-fashioned mass media of television, newspapers, but I'm thinking more of the new media as well, the social media that a lot of our youngsters go into. So that is important that we do that we do focus on that as well. And okay, so that's my first observation on that. The second observation, I feel, and I think this again is a challenge because it doesn't just involve the council here, it also involves the business community as well as other is the infrastructure and the challenge of that. Because although, you know, the Vale's got its own infrastructure and obviously road signs and finger signs, and some of that is done by community councils as well, like we have in Penarth, where Welsh is first and English is second. I think we need to do more. I think we try and do a lot as a council, but I think we need to encourage people and incentivise, or even nudge businesses to demonstrate Welsh a lot more, and also trying to get more Welsh-speaking people, you know, in shops, in cafes, and have the Welsh language sign so that people feel free to speak Welsh and encourage. And perhaps, you know, some people say some incidental Welsh, like Shemai, and my Welsh is awful, I know it is, but Shemai and you know, and that sort of thing, because I think that way it will help people to speak more Welsh in a conversational way. Okay, I know that lots of Estonian Sports and Care reports saying there needs to be more incidental Welsh, but I think we need to really pick that up in terms of action plans to what is manageable and what is realistic. So I shut up now. Ian, do you want to come in before we get anyone else wants to contribute as well? Yeah, thank you.
I think Ruba will speak after us as well. Yeah, go on, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chair. Diolch yn fawr, David, am y cyflwyniad. There's a lot of very interesting points, I think, I picked up when there, particularly, I think, from the council side in terms of, data capture and, sort of actually, as you say, blowing our own trumpet in terms of saying, look, we have done this, we set these targets, we've smashed those targets. So there's a question whether the targets were great in the first place or whether they were poorly set, but that's a different matter. It's good to see that, and officers, I think, have been very much on the front foot in terms of sort of the Future Generations Act, in terms of sort of looking at the standards and how they can be implemented. At the same time, though, and I recognise that this is a fairly high-level document, there's also a little bit missing from this, which is, I think, a sense of fun and a sense of humanity. There's language is about communication, it's about talking with people, it's about sort of interacting with others, and sometimes these documents kind of end up as a little bit of a tick box exercise, and in the sense of, have we done this? Yes, we have. Has it really impacted and improved or made a difference to anybody? Well, I'm not sure whether that's always the case. So I think what's missing from here, and I'm hoping that it'll come through as so as you as David meets with others, is a sense of what Welsh speakers want and how Welsh speakers actually live their lives. Because with the best will in the world, someone who's monolingual cannot be a perfect judge of how others live their lives. The Vale of Glamorgan is a predominantly English-speaking area. What that means in practice, in communities of practice, linguistically, is that if I meet someone I don't know, then I will automatically speak English to them unless I'm given an indication that they are a Welsh speaker, in which case I'll probably speak Welsh to them. Welsh is, in many cases, is the preferred language of my communication, but I'm aware that I'm not allowed really to do that because without an interpreter here, this conversation would be meaningless to a lot of the people listening. So therefore, there are all sorts of challenges which are not about what we've written in the strategy, but about how those things are actually implemented in real life and real worlds. So I think what this is missing is that sense of, whether it's case study or user experience, of how Welsh speakers in the Vale actually live their lives and how they interpret and move around this data, because there's a lot of things that's based on hard indicators. Oh, this many people attended a course, this many people are in Welsh medium education according to PLASC or whatever, but there's a lot for a large number of people who have Welsh language skills but often limited opportunities to use those, simply because the circumstances are not there. So it's about ensuring that this, as a document, as a living document, as David said, is actually led by Welsh speakers, by bilinguals within the community, and not a top-down council or service-led document where a load of people who actually don't live in the Vale or don't speak Welsh in the Vale on a daily basis are saying what should happen. So I think this is really interesting. Obviously, there's a fairly tight time frame, I think, to bring this all back, by February and into March. But I'm hoping that that we'll have that sort of flavour within the action plan or within this as document as it moves forward. That looks like it reflects real lived experience, whether that's teenagers who come from an English-speaking background but go to a Welsh medium education establishment, whether that's native Welsh speakers who are either from the area or have moved into the area and use Welsh on a daily basis, or those who have or those who are learners or have children in Welsh medium establishments, where they would sort of have a different take on how this operates. So it's getting that totality of experience rather than assuming that there is a single Welsh medium community that's bilingual and does everything in the same way. And hopefully we'll get a lot of that. Obviously, the WESP is under consultation, as has been said. That was at Learning and Culture last week. That was an interesting discussion, I think, there, but we'll see how that goes. I think also next week is Mentor Iaith Bryngwch Ganwg's AGM. I think we had an invitation to that today, so I don't know if there's any opportunities to make further links with there, but it's also about understanding how bilingualism operates differently in Penarth, in Barry, in Cowbridge, and in more rural areas, because those do have different socializing needs and requirements. I bumped into somebody on Saturday who lives in Penarth, and they were complaining that things are in Barry, but then you talk to people in Barry and they say, oh well, we don't get enough here because it's not really meeting the needs of the people that are there. So there's an awful lot of stuff that's slightly under the surface, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to tease some of that out over the next couple of months. Thank you for indulging that, Chair.
That's all right. Ruba?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's really just sort of picking up on points, Chair, that you made and that that Ian's just made as well, in terms of sort of consulting the communities, so the sort of the Welsh-speaking communities and what that consists of. Chair, you mentioned that, you know, in your ward, for example, that you think there's a correlation between, you know, poverty and Welsh speaking. I suppose my, you know, as a non-Welsh speaker who's moved to Wales sort of in the last 10 years, for me, there feels like there's lots of I've forgotten the word now, sort of this choice about choosing to speak Welsh by English speakers. So there's a whole community of, you know, people perhaps, you know, coming from England, deciding that the Welsh speaking schools are the best schools, therefore sending their children to those schools. And that and as Ian rightly said, you know, there are different communities. So we really do need to touch on all those communities, those children, you know, whatever their parents, you know, aspirations or objectives, you know, may be. Those children, for example, will, you know, they will be part of a community. So self-selection is the word that I the words that I was thinking of, because there is some self-selection that I've experienced, but, you know, particularly in Cardiff and in Penarth. So I think that would be an interesting, you know, that itself would be sort of interesting to have sort of some, you know, statistics around that. But it is really important to look at those communities as, you know, they are different communities that would have to feed into that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Di, do you want to come back at all? Any of these?
Yes, I've been furiously making some notes as you've been coming up with all these different points. Going back to your comments originally about the correlation between deprivation and the Welsh-speaking wards, of course, what in doing the assessment, and I've done some impact assessments on education issues for a number of other organisations, and of course, when the 5-year strategies came out originally, the social deprivation duty hadn't come in, so that sort of correlation between the wards in terms of, and the lower super output areas in terms of social deprivation and not just Welsh speakers, but, you know, sort of disability and all that kind of all the different sort of correlations that are going on is still quite a new thing. I made sure that the social deprivation and the socioeconomic duty was included in the assessment just to show the initial stages for that. But I'm sure there are people that will be able to help in getting some kind of correlation table into the final document just for a bit more detail. The problem with the timing of getting these documents through, of course, is that we haven't got the census data. But what we can do is put an action into the action plan to say that will be looked at when the data becomes available. There's nothing wrong with putting an action for maybe the first or second year of the promotion strategy to actually look at that as an action in more detail. So that you know, we can certainly do something initially now and then something in more detail when the census data comes out. Your other point about the getting the Welsh out into the community and working with businesses and that kind of thing, certainly in terms of early years provision as well, the WESP is going to be really important in that kind of thing. And again, partners like the Urdd Mudiad Meithrin, the Mentor Iaith are key in getting that early years provision up and running. And again, that's a link to the WESP. So having a look at the draft WESP and comparing the two documents and making sure there are strong links between them is obviously something we're going to have to do very carefully over the next couple of months to make sure that both are saying the same thing and exactly what's needed for the Vale to make sure both documents move forwards. The infrastructure, I do know that in one of the consultations from one of the other councils in South Wales where they were talking about getting more casual use of Welsh. They described it as Welsh by stealth, and they were talking about things like running youth groups, say sporting groups, for example, rugby, football, that kind of thing, but that they were teaching the young people to actually score in Welsh or pick their team colours using the Welsh words, so that there was they were actually going to a sporting event, but picking up some Welsh vocabulary along the way. I quite like the idea of Welsh by stealth in some areas where Welsh isn't sort of widely spoken, because it was introducing them as part of the language as part of everyday life. So we can certainly look at some similar actions in the Wales action plan moving forwards. Your comment, Councillor Johnson, about the need for case studies. As I mentioned, I'm going to the Welsh Language Forum on Monday, which is chaired, I think, by your mentor Iaith. I can certainly ask them to put some questions out to their members and get some current feedback and case studies in that we can put into the final document, so that there is that public voice that you mentioned in the final version. There isn't at the moment, because I haven't actually been anywhere yet to ask anyone. But it's certainly a perfectly valid point, and I'll make sure I ask that at the forum meeting on Monday to get some feedback. I know in 2016 there was a public survey done with a lot of surveys sent out, but that data is now 5 years old as well. So I'll make sure on Monday that I get a couple of good case studies in. And in terms also of the last point, the mentor iaith, as you mentioned about Barry and Penarth, for example, I think I've put in the assessment that, of course, some people maybe who live in Wick or Iweni or Corntown may well be going into Bridgend, so they're going cross-boundary. So maybe what's needed is some more work between the mentor iaith in South Wales to show where those cross-boundary links are, because some people in Barry, for example, may be going to Cardiff. It's not fixed by boundaries of councils. There are people that go elsewhere, public transport links, that kind of thing. So maybe that's a project in itself to find out where people go to socialise as well. And I think that was all the points I'd made there. So thank you all for that.
Just come back quickly, Chair. You're muted, Mark.
So do you want to come back here?
Just very quickly, I think you've just David's just highlighted the importance of following user experience, and I think that's for me that's the key takeaway from just from reading the report, is just to consider how people actually live their lives and how this document will allow and improve Welsh speakers, bilinguals, ability to use the language where they feel most comfortable to do so, and support them in doing that. So that user experience understanding, I think, is key to this, because that's what takes it forward, takes it beyond just being tick box exercises. Thank you. Okay,
I've got no one else indicating they wish to speak, and therefore can I thank Dave and Tom for this work, especially Di, on this report. Could also I make a recommendation that our comments are referred back to Cabinet as part of the consultation document, and also can I also make a further recommendation that the action plan comes back to this committee just for a final look at. I thought that'd be good, and maybe we can get a little presentation on the action plan as well. Are you happy to endorse what I've just said, committee? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Project Zero, delivering the Climate Change Challenge Plan. I think it's over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. This is a second reference, again, a report from Cabinet for the leaders, excuse me, report. I've been speaking all day today, so my voice is just starting to go, so my apologies. We've referred this report to yourselves, as well as the Environment and Regeneration Committee yesterday evening. The report's also been distributed to all elected members for their information. And the purpose of the report is to bring members up to date in terms of the governance and delivery arrangements associated with Project Zero. Committee will remember that the response to the climate emergency that was declared in July 2019, and then subsequently the nature emergency in July of this year, is encapsulated within Project Zero. Project Zero, in terms of a challenge plan, contains 18 challenges with a series of different steps required to meet each of those challenges. The plan is about reaching net zero as an organisation by 2030, but it's also a broader piece of work than that in demonstrating strong leadership across the county. So it has a series of commitments that are both internal and external across those three elements of demonstrating strong leadership, fulfilling our responsibility to current and future generations, and also making a difference. The plan, importantly, draws linkages with existing plans and strategies that the council has. And the report that is referred to your committee this evening, Chair, notes that it doesn't replace the council's statutory obligations and responsibilities. It articulates our commitments to do more and to understand the challenge of climate change and to take action to influence the behaviours and actions of others. So the report itself has a series of appendices. Appendix A shows the governance arrangements for Project Zero. It reports to a Reshaping Services Transformation Board, which is a joint board of the senior leadership team with Cabinet, and ultimately to Cabinet, with your committee and the Environment and Regeneration Committee having oversight of the delivery of Project Zero. We've established a project board, and that project board is chaired by the Council's Managing Director, and it's attended by a series of senior responsible officers, each of which have been tasked with the delivery of one or more of the challenges contained within the plan. Appendix B to the report that's been referred to you, Chair, sets out a project brief, which just details in a little bit more information the names of the officers who've been associated with each of those challenges, and also some of the initial high-level activities that the board is currently progressing. So they are the arrangements. That board is meeting every other month. It's now looking to develop a series of individual action plans so that each responsible officer has a plan of action to take to meet those challenges. We had a discussion at the Environment and Regeneration Committee yesterday evening, and members requested a report on progress to come to the committee via Cabinet 3 times a year. And the reason for the timing of that is to synchronise both with the meeting schedule for your committees and also the frequency of those board meetings. So I would hope that by reporting progress 3 times a year, you would see progress between each of those reporting cycles. The report also sets out some information in terms of developing a baseline. This is something that I remember we discussed at your committee during the consultation process in terms of understanding how big a task this actually is in terms of meeting the net zero commitment for the organisation, and also understanding the wider impact of climate change within the Vale of Glamorgan. Workers has concluded recently for the first set of returns to the Welsh Government using the toolkit that they've published for the public sector. I met this afternoon with colleagues in the project support team to start to look through that initial data, and they're now doing a piece of evaluation and analysis for me to look at where those emissions are most prevalent for the organisation, and equally where are the opportunities to make the biggest impact in taking action to tackle climate change. So that work will be reported as part of the regular reporting through to committees, alongside the progress being made against meeting those challenges. I mentioned earlier the importance placed by the plan on the outward facing elements as well, and the report finally concludes with some information around the importance of the ongoing engagement on this agenda with our communities, and there is a commitment to that ongoing community conversation. So we make reference to some work that is underway with the youth service, for example. There's a huge amount of work being done via our schools, and members will note the work, for example, the Barry Island Primary School did in a whole school enrichment week earlier this year, where the young people there did a series of activities focused around climate change, and the head teacher there is committed to making those resources available to all of our schools. We've also established through the Public Services Board a regular liaison meeting with the town and community councils, and some discussions are underway about how we can work with town and community councils to deliver both the PSB Climate Change Charter as well as Project Zero from the council's perspective. And we're also in the early stages now of developing the Green Ambassadors scheme, which we're starting to do some work to try and link together various communities of interest in this agenda across the Vale, so we can harness that kind of community power. And an example of that, we met earlier this week with a community group in Wenvo who have started up because they want to take some action within the village in order to tackle climate change. And that was a really positive meeting, full of constructive challenge on both sides, but should, I hope, lead to some really good local grassroots level action. So that's the report this evening, Chair, bringing for an update in terms of the delivery arrangements.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. I'm open to members. Okay, George, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Leader. I'm not sure if Caris is still on the call. Not Leader, sorry, Chair. There, Mark. But I'm not sure if Caris is still on the call. But I'd just like to send my apologies for not being able to make the earlier start at 5:45. But with your permission, if she is on the call, I'd just like to thank her for all of her work for the authority. Wish her well, and she's going to be a big loss to us, and I'll be sad to see her go. But in terms of my question, Chair, it's in relation to the impact of Project Zero and the implications on council housing. I noticed that there's a reference in the report to housing strategy. Just a question, really, whether we're on track to ensure that our council housing and local authority owned properties will be compliant with this. Obviously, there will be costs to the authority involved with ensuring that energy and heating systems within council houses are compliant with net zero, and just be grateful if you could provide an update on that.
Thank you. I got quite a few members, so if we take individual questions, then I think Tom can respond. All right, so we've got a first tranche of 3 members. Councillor Cox next, then Councillor John.
Thank you. I was wondering, Tom, your project board, will you be inviting experts in various fields to present papers to the board? So no doubt you will need some external experience for some of these. And secondly, on the community councils and town councils, you mentioned the work some individual works groups are doing in their area. So to get an overall picture of what's happening in an area, will you be coordinating this through the town councils and the community councils? And will there be a sort of two-way feedback, you to them and from them to you?
Thank you. And Councillor John next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I attended a meeting, as Tom is well aware, last Saturday in Lantwick Major, and basically there was about 45 people present, and they were all very interested and full of ideas of what they could change the world on. And I think it's very important, you know, that we're working under the one umbrella here, the Vale of Glamorgan, and people get carried away too much. It's important that they actually communicate through the Vale, because otherwise we're going to lose it. It's going to be all over the place, because lots of splinter groups will form, and they're all in a panic stage, some of these people, about what the future holds. And of course, last week with COP26 still going, they were all very anxious as to what could happen. I mean, for example, I had one woman on my table saying we should get all the farmers to plough the fields and plant food so that we could benefit. You know, there were so many ideas coming out from some people, and I think to myself, hang on a minute, slow down. Slow down, you're getting too excited with this, you know. So I think it's very important that we do communicate with these groups. I'm telling people to write to the Vale for advice on where they should go on this, you know, before they go any further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do you want to answer those points, Tom?
Certainly. In terms of Councillor Carroll's question around council housing, I'm aware that a significant amount of work has been done under the Welsh Housing Quality Standard, which will certainly assist in this regard, and also some of the commitments around new council housing developments. So, for example, the Court Road development, which has got significant carbon reduction as part of its design. But I will, with your permission, Chair, go away and get some more detailed information on that. I think the leader may have some further information on Councillor Carroll's question.
Yeah, indeed.
Do you want to come in, Neil? Yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, I've been talking all day as well. As far as council housing is concerned, it is a commitment that we will have, because Welsh Government wants us to do it anyway, is that we will have zero net, zero use housing, and that is our intention. When we're putting plans together at the moment, they are exactly that. The only thing that I have to say is that in order for us to have those particular council houses, then we have to get the planning permission for them. But once we get that, yes, we will build them, and yes, it will be net zero use in use.
Thank you very much. Okay, do you want to come back, Tom, to the other points now?
Certainly. Councillor Cox's query around inviting specific expertise in various fields. Absolutely, Councillor Cox. We've started some work currently around electric vehicle charging infrastructure, for example, and looking to seek advice on that. And also, I'm anticipating that in the evaluation and analysis of the emissions data that we were talking about earlier, we'll also look to work, for example, with Welsh Government's Energy Service, and we've had some preliminary meetings with them in the development of the strategy and the plan, because that expertise is relatively specialist, and there's an opportunity here to upskill our council colleagues so that they are acquiring that knowledge as part of this project. The second question that you asked, Councillor Cox, in terms of town and community councils and that sort of two-way feedback mechanism, in terms of our sort of community leadership commitment within the plan and the desire to harness that kind of community activity, I don't want to put too much process around it necessarily, but I think the point that you make in terms of the role of town and community councils and how close and connected they often are with those very local community groups is a really good one. And I wonder if perhaps it might be useful in future, if the leader were to be agreeable, that when we bring these reports through Cabinet and to committees, that we include a reference to send those reports to each town and community council, so that there's a regular update going to those town and community councils as part of the delivery of this work. And then perhaps, should those town and community councils wish to agenda that report, they can obviously do that, and that creates that feedback mechanism that would work in parallel to the PSB meetings. So that might address that gap if the leader were to be happy to accept that. Totally.
Thank you.
Phew.
Okay, I think Councillor King wants to say something. Councillor King.
Thanks ever so much, Chair. Somebody mentioned electric vehicles, and I immediately get excited about this. I've got my fingers firmly, but anyway, I've got them crossed, because there's a possibility that through the CCR city region stuff, we may get some small electric hire cars, because I think that might be a little bit like the e-bike. If you and I knew that we could log on and book an electric car to go to Tesco's or other supermarkets are available, or whatever, and for a relatively modest price, I think it may have two things. It may have the effect of avoiding or helping people avoid having two cars, and be better able to cope with one. But moreover, a bit like the electric bike, for you to try out an electric car cheaply, without any of the massive financial commitment. So I've got my fingers firmly crossed and desperately hoping that we'll get a few, because I think that they're looking at how they may purchase and how they'll distribute over the region. So I'm saying yes please, yes please. I'll keep you informed.
Okay. All right. Anyone wants to respond before I say something?
I haven't responded specifically to Councillor John's
okay, then go on then, Tom.
Councillor John was asking about the importance of working as a whole in terms of the Vale of Glamorgan, and absolutely, I think the commitments in Project Zero make that very clear. One of the things that will happen now over the next few months is the development of the website that will host this information, and I'm hoping that will, in the same way as we were talking about in the previous item, start to showcase some of the work that these community groups as well as ourselves are doing. So I'm hoping again that will help to keep this conversation going. So definitely something that is an ongoing development, Councillor John.
Thank you.
Okay, I was going to ask a few points as well about a website. A Project Zero website, I think, will be a really good idea, and also to check on the progress of various things that are happening. I think that would be useful for members to find out, and maybe we could have some sort of area where it's public and areas perhaps which are a bit more work in progress, which are less public, but nevertheless they exist. I also think there's some opportunities with the third sector to get involved in this as well, because there are organisations, and I'm thinking of the Repair Cafe, which is, in Cardiff and in Penarth, and I know probably other parts of the Vale as well, which do some really good work. And I think one of the things that we need to do is emphasise not just recycle, but reuse as well, and repair. And I think that's really important, that we try and link in perhaps building services, perhaps, and with the Repair Cafe, and also Care and Repair, because I think that's another organisation that could clearly benefit from this. So that and we also need to think about the products that we buy as well. I mean, there is, for example, there is a phone called Fairphone. It's on its first level, which basically is a phone whereby you can get replacement parts quite easily. So if something goes wrong, you don't have to go for a brand new phone. You can get it repaired, and I think that's something that we do need to think about. The other thing I was going to focus on also was about not just about new housing, but also retrofitting housing as well. Now, obviously, I know lots of houses, especially in Stanwell Ward, which are south-facing. So an awful lot of them have got solar panels on. But perhaps maybe we need to think about perhaps looking at that for council housing in the future as well. Looking at that, as well as obviously things like recycling rainwater, into fresh lavatories. I think that's an area we could do a bit more work on, and I think that is something that we could help. I think liaison with town and community council is absolutely spot on. I mean, I think that is important, because I think they got initiatives which I know which are quite good, and it's something that we could learn from each other. And the other thing which I have seen in Cardiff, and a little bit in the Vale, and that is new sort of garden verges, or verges in the middle of roads, perhaps, for sustainable drainage. And I just wonder, perhaps, I know there may be projects involved in that. I know we got a bit of that going on in Windsor Road. I just wonder if Liz wants to come on about the points I'm making, because I know she's raised her hands as well. So Liz, do you want to say something?
Yes, thanks, Chair. If I could, I suppose one of the issues that we face with this agenda is the skills base within the Vale. There are a lot of things that we want to do, but do we have the right people to do them? And I know when we were looking at procurement issues and increasing the amount that we procure locally, we actually ran a load of Meet the Buyer events. And one of them was actually to do with retrofitting properties and putting sort of green energy type facilities into, whether that be, you know, when we were talking about our council housing stock, or whether it was to do with our 21st century schools and all the other things that we're doing. Do we have the right number of people with the right level of skills to work with us on that? It was really encouraging that on the one I attended, there were over 50 companies that attended that were all keen to get those skills. But that capacity has got to be built, because at the moment it's quite a niche market, and it needs to go mainstream really if we're going to achieve everything that we want to.
Thank you for that, Liz. Does anyone else want to make any comments before I bring Tom back on? Tom, do you want to say something?
Only to thank you, Chair, for the comments and suggestions that you made, and I'll make sure that these are now reflected in the relevant action plans for the senior responsible officers taking forward those challenges. And that's been really useful. Thank you.
And can I also say thank you very much, and also can I also echo what ENER said, that we would like updates to this committee as well, just to check maybe 3 times a year, or if not more, if needed, you know. So thank you very much. Okay, and we're happy to support the other recommendations as well. Can we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think is to do with elections, something that might be happening next year. So we now have a report, which I think is now on the County Borough Development Electoral Divisions, and the monitoring officer, Debbie, are you here?
It is, yes, and I am here. Thank you very much, Chair. So this is a report which I'm bringing prior to it going to Cabinet and then on to Council. And it's to bring, the first report is to bring members' attention to the final stage of the electoral arrangements review for the Vale of Glamorgan Council. Members will recall, I think it was ongoing for the best part of 2 years, a review that was led by the Local Democracy Boundary Commission for Wales. That was finalised earlier in the year, back in February, and the matter has then been presented to the final report, presented to Welsh Government, and we now have the order which is attached to Appendix A. So it's bringing to members' attention that order. Just for ease of reference, I've set out in paragraph 2.1 of the report, in effect, the schedule from the order, which summarises the electoral ward names, the area of the electoral wards, and the corresponding number of members for each of those wards. So that's set out in the body of the report. Also, just to flag up these provisions with regards to the electoral ward changes, they'll come in readiness for the May 2022 elections, and the current electoral wards will be abolished at that stage. So that will be the time scale with regards to when those provisions in the order come into force. As will be expected, because there are some polling districts which are now in different wards, different electoral wards. As a result, there has been a need to do a bit of housekeeping and to change references. So they are detailed in the body of the report, and again, for ease of reference, Appendix C sets out the polling districts which apply as a result of the order. There is one typo which I should pick up. It's crept in, a polling district JGO, so that needs to be deleted. But other than that, it is as per Appendix C, and we'll just weave that amendment into the recommendations with your agreement. For completeness, I'd also like just to flag up, members will be aware of this, the review relating to town and community councils, because of the timing of the principal council review being when it was, we were requested to postpone our town and community council boundary review until after the local elections. So that's something to look forward to in 2023, with obviously a lot of the administrative work starting in 2022. But just to flag up that the council boundaries, obviously for the town and community councils, remain unchanged, but of course the polling district references, which are flagged up in Appendix C, will also relate to town and community councils, so they have relevance in that regard. Just also to flag up that, as anticipated, there will be quite significant communication awareness raising going on as a result of this report and obviously the next report. So we'll be working with colleagues in comms to get the necessary social media comms out, information on our website, sharing the report with community liaison committee and also town and community councils, and also getting correspondence out the other side of Christmas via a household notification letter as well. So making sure that everybody is clear and aware of the changes. So unless there are any particular questions, the recommendations are as set out in the report, but I would ask that we just pick up in recommendation 3 that it's subject to the reference to polling district JGO being deleted to that appendix. But I'm happy to take any questions.
I think George, Councillor Cowers wants to say something.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Chair. Just a quick one, Debbie. The new polling district PFO, which old polling district does that replace?
I will be able to tell you, but I need to cross-check another document. So if you just bear with me, but I certainly, yeah, I will be able to tell you. Well, maybe if I email you, that might be easier, okay, because yeah, there's quite a lot of paperwork. Sort of, I'd need to cross-check.
Yeah, there's one more in St Nicholas and Landcarven than I was expecting. That's the only thing. But
oh, right.
It might be that it's probably that I miscounted. But but no, I did. That's fine. Thank you.
Is that okay? I'll drop you an email tomorrow. Thank you very much. And I'll copy all of the members of the committee into that as well.
Okay. All right. Are we happy? Oh, I think we haven't got any other comments from members. I think, are we happy to move on and have to support that? Yeah. If we move on to the next item, Debbie.
Lovely, thank you very much. This report, and again this is being brought to Scrutiny Committee prior to Cabinet and then on to Council, because these are matters for determination by Council. So this report is a mini review of polling places and polling stations. So we did the main review, as you'll recall, the statutory 10-year review back tail end of 2019. That took effect early 2020. Of course, that was prior to us being mindful, shall we say, of some of the challenges that COVID we're going to present. And of course, we're mindful that for the May 2022 elections, albeit hopefully the measures won't be as strict, there will still need to be appropriate COVID measures in place. So I've had regard to that. I've also had regard to stakeholder representations following on from the May 21 elections. And I've set out within the body of the report quite a detailed summary of the proposed changes. So that's set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.17. I won't go through that in detail because it is set out in quite considerable detail in the report, unless there's any specific aspects that members wish me to cover. I've also attached at Appendix 5 a schedule. And you'll probably be familiar with this schedule because you saw it in a slightly different form when we did the statutory tenure review back in 2019. But I think it's quite a good discipline, and it just keeps everything nice and clear for everybody, so you can see what are the unchanged polling places and stations and what are the changes. So Appendix 5 hopefully will be of assistance. Since drafting the report, we've been contacted, or my colleagues in the electoral services team have been contacted by the landlord of the Glenbrook Inn. And he has advised that an additional room has also now become available, and so I will be slightly changing the wording with regard to the Glenbrook Inn, so that rather than referring in both instances to this the area known as the Skittle Alley, it will be a station A and B within the venue of the Glenbrook Inn, and that just keeps all of our options open, because I'm just mindful this additional room has become available now, but it might not be available as we get closer to May 2022. So I will make that slight change with your agreement. Again, as mentioned in agenda item 6, considerable communications, making sure that everybody's aware of the changes. So as I've mentioned, the household notification letter, information on social media, and obviously providing the relevant information to the Community Liaison Committee and Town and Community Councils. So I don't know whether there are any specific questions on this report.
Apologies. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to HC1 and HD1, actually, Debbie. I think it's excellent that we've created 2 separate polling stations for those polling districts. I've always thought it was slightly strange how they were always sort of amalgamated into one. The only thing I would say with that, I've always thought, given the size of polling district HC1, it's quite a distance for electors in that polling district to travel to the polling station. And I appreciate there is perhaps a lack of potential places in HC1, but I've always thought potentially something in the little car park would be more convenient for people living in that area than travelling to the Glenbrook. I was just wondering if consideration had been given to an alternative location.
Yes, it has, and one of the issues is topography. That's been one of the concerns. So we have spoken with the management at the little supermarket, and that we haven't been able to take that any further. So it is problematic. And I appreciate that there is that distance, but I think weighing everything up, this has been seen as the best way forward. I've certainly consulted with the local ward members on this point, and I think certainly by putting in place the 2 polling stations there, at least it should ease the pressure and assist the voters. But no, unfortunately, the space in Lidl's car park wasn't to be.
Perhaps I could come in there, Chair, because it actually was there once. We tried it once, and then management wouldn't allow it to be there again, if I recall.
Mark, I'm conscious you're on mute at the moment.
Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Debbie. It's very, very quickly. It's just in relation to the question that Councillor Carroll had about changes of polling station, polling districts, that's the one.
Yep.
So obviously Appendix 5 here has got a list of the polling districts as they will be and has got an explanation of the change. So I think was a question about PF0, George, because I think that's described as being the old QC0.
Oh, thank you very much. You saved me a job sending an email. Thank you.
Read your papers.
All right then. All right. Can I thank you all, and can I thank you, Debbie, for that? And I think we're happy to support those typographical and other changes as well. So appreciate that. And I don't have any other items for tonight. I got no part 1, no part 2. Can I thank you all and enjoy the meal, and hopefully, you know, Wales will qualify for the World Cup, but you never know. All right. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
See you said on night, Chair. Good night.
Hello, Mark.
How are you, Neil? Are you all right? Thank you. Thank you all.